Welcome to History at the OK Corral. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this episode with a fellow history lover. And now, on to tonight's episode. Central Texas, January 23, 1871. Amidst the rolling landscape that surrounds them, on an isolated strip of cattle trail, 3 working cowboys ride west from the town of Weatherford. They are on their way to the ranch of Britton Johnson, better known as Britt Johnson, who rides at the head of the group. They intend to gather Johnson's cattle and make a return trip to sell them in Weatherford. With Johnson are Dennis Cureton and Paint Crawford. All 3 men are known and respected locally for their skill as cowhands and their dealings in business. They are all also ex-slaves, officially made American citizens and given their freedom less than a decade earlier. However, despite the tenuous state of the nation in the Reconstruction era, Britt Johnson has built a reputation amongst all peoples of the area as a forthright and upstanding citizen, as well as a local hero. 7 years prior, in the summer of 1864, while still under the bonds of slavery, Johnson had been commissioned by his then master to travel to nearby Parker County to procure supplies for the ranch. Britt Johnson had left his wife and young children with the Fitzpatrick family, trusting that they would be safe from the incessant Comanche and Kiowa raiding that plagued the area at the time. Upon his return, Johnson was met with the horrifying news that the small neighborhood he and his family called home had been laid waste to. His son, Jim, and several members of the Fitzpatrick family had been murdered, and the rest of his family had been kidnapped by Comanche and Kiowa raiders. He had secured written permission from his then master to travel alone on the frontier, a legal necessity at the time, and then ventured out on his own in search of not only his family, but the surviving members of the white Fitzpatrick family as well. After months of tracking, and subsequently working his way into the good graces of the tribes, Johnson had been able to negotiate trades for the return of not only his family, but all of the surviving members that had been taken in what came to be known to history as the Elm Creek raid. Some members of the tribes, though, regarded his dealings as being underhanded and self-interested, as he had reportedly absconded with more rescued captives than the Kiowa and Comanche had agreed to. Thus, some warriors of both tribes vowed that, should the opportunity ever arise, they would take their retribution on Britt Johnson. Now, 7 years later, Johnson pulls his large horse to a halt, as the men set out to make camp for the night. The trusted steed has been with him since before he ventured out alone in search of his family, and is not only a trusted workmate, but a treasured companion. Scampering around the horse's feet, Johnson's small dog greets his owner as he steps from his saddle to the ground, whimpering and excitedly wagging his tail. Though the scene might appear akin to that of a relatively placid modern-day trail ride, the situation at hand is anything but. Though considerable time has passed since the Elm Creek raid, hostilities between settlers on the Texas frontier and the mighty Comanche and Kiowa tribes still rage, and any territory between towns and homesteads is considered to be dangerous ground for travelers. All 3 men, though, are seasoned hands at both working cattle and fighting hostile native tribes. Thus, they carry about their work of setting up camp for the night with a workmanlike deliberation that, to the outside observer, seems wholly untroubled by the potential danger at hand. However, all 3 men are also heavily armed with repeating rifles and Colt revolvers, a necessity in this territory. They also carry hundreds of rounds of ammunition. As the men finish making camp and prepare to bed down for the evening, they notice another group of working cowhands hauling freight to Weatherford, camped roughly 1.5 miles away. Thinking themselves to be relatively safe for the night, the men soon drift off to sleep after consuming a cold supper. The next morning, January 24th, arrives with the typical merciless chill that plagues the country throughout the winter. As the morning sun begins to peek over the horizon, Britt Johnson, Dennis Cureton, and Paint Crawford rise and begin to prepare themselves and their horses to move on for the day. However, just as their thoughts begin to drift to preparing breakfast and what the day's travel might hold, the 3 men in the small camp are startled by the sickening sound of thunderous hoofbeats cutting through the morning stillness. Looking in the direction of the sound, the three men see an oncoming cloud of 25 Kiowa warriors bearing down upon their encampment at full speed. The Kiowa are in the area conducting raiding on local homesteads when they have spotted Britt Johnson and company the day prior. Seeking to make good on their old promise of settling their score with Johnson, they now charge upon the camp in full regalia, their war whoops intermittently piercing through the thunderous cacophony of their horses' hoofbeats. Though a completely separate and much smaller tribe than their allies in the Comanche, the Kiowa are just as renowned in this territory for their bravery, horsemanship, and ruthlessness. While the Comanche are known for their Spartan-like ornamentation, though that has begun to change in the latter 19th century, the Kiowa possess a far more complex cultural tapestry of dress, religion, economics, and social structure. The Kiowa that now charge upon the camp are more ornately dressed than their Comanche counterparts, but their tactics, once familiar to Johnson, Curtin, and Crawford, are drawn from the same well of knowledge and experience drawn upon by the Comanche, as well as other Plains tribes. Rather than a head-on charge at the cowhand's campsite, the warriors maneuver forward in a whirling cyclone, in which the rider nearest the target fires his shot, before continuing on to the back of the circle to reload and return for another shot. The whirlwind of bullets and arrows soon encircles the entirety of the small three-man camp, which provides no cover to its inhabitants. Now, the once placid campsite is engulfed in the storm of violence, as all three men scramble for any semblance of cover they can find. They pour fire from their rifles into the thick oncoming Kiowa formation, loosing dozens of rounds in little more than a few minutes. However, essentially caught in the open, Curtin and Crawford are quickly cut down by Kiowa bullets and arrows. With no other options at hand, Britt Johnson draws the large bowie knife he keeps in a scabbard on his belt and, after a heart-wrenching few milliseconds, dispatches his beloved horse with the large steel blade. The hulking animal falls where it had stood, and Johnson takes what sparse cover he can find behind the animal's corpse. Now, aside from his small dog, Britt Johnson is the only remaining member of the camp left alive. From their vantage point roughly a mile and a half away, the team of ranch hands hauling freight to Weatherford can only watch as the fight unfolds, afraid of drawing the much larger Kiowa force's ire upon themselves. They watch, awestruck, as Britt Johnson now fights for his very life in a battle that he very likely knows is lost. However, Johnson fights on with the fury of a man possessed. In a momentary lull in the attack, he scrambles to the bodies of his comrades and procures their firearms and ammunition, before retaking his position behind the body of his horse and continuing to pour fire into the ranks of the Kiowa. With seemingly robotic efficiency, Johnson continues to fire and reload, methodically picking off his attackers as the relentless succession of charges continues. No one can know what thoughts crossed the mind of Britt Johnson during these lonesome, fearful moments. It is a safe assumption, however, that the memories of his beloved wife and children, now only a few dozen miles away, flood his mind. So too might have the memories of his time with the tribes, the killing of his son, and the promises of the disaffected warriors to exact their revenge. Though no one can know his thoughts in his final minutes, Britt Johnson's actions now become the stuff of Texas legend. As the Kiowa warriors dart around him like a swarm of enraged hornets, Johnson gives no quarter and asks for none. Shot after shot rings out, deafening all within earshot as the ground seems to quake with the rumble of the horse's hooves. Finally, though by what means we are unsure, Britt Johnson is struck by either a bullet or an arrow and dealt a mortal wound. Though the onlooking men of the freight hauling detail are unable to discern the moment at which Johnson is killed, they witness the Kiowa swarm his position and know that all is lost for the brave lone cowboy. Hours later, they venture forth to the site of the battle, assured the Kiowa have now left the area. What they find bespeaks a fight and an aftermath that, even on the bleeding edge of the Texas frontier, was unique in both its brutality and its ruthlessness. They find the bodies of Dennis Curtin and Paint Crawford where they had fallen, the tops of both their heads freshly scalped. They see the body of Johnson's horse, prostrate in its last act of service, riddled with bullets and pincushioned with arrows. Behind the body of the horse, they find Britt Johnson. He has been terribly mutilated, with his face gruesomely disfigured, scalped, and eviscerated. So too has the body of his small but eternally faithful dog, found shoved into Johnson's torso. However, in a testament to Johnson's commitment to fight until the end, 173 cartridges are found scattered around his body. To the men investigating the site, and in the eye of posterity, this is a near unbelievable amount of firepower for one man to have unleashed during a fight that was all but assuredly lost before it even began. In the end, the bodies of Britt Johnson, Dennis Cureton, and Paint Crawford are buried in a common grave next to the road near which they fell. A small marker with all three of their names is left at the spot, which is today marked by an official Texas Historic Site marker. Though he was not afforded a major affair for a funeral and was meant to suffer some of the worst indignities wrought upon American citizens within its tumultuous history, Britt Johnson is remembered as a Texas legend and an example to all of what selflessness, determination, and bravery really mean. For their part, the Kiowa would go on to retreat to the northwest, to the vast open plains. Here, they would again join forces with the Comanche in the ensuing 4 years in what would come to be known to history as the Red River War. This war would ultimately spell the beginning of the end for both the Kiowa and the Comanche, two powerful tribes that had been ravaged for decades by warfare and disease. But the many tales of the Red River War, as well as the full story of Britt Johnson's one-man ventures to reclaim his family, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the Join button below, or click the link in the description to become a member on Patreon. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.